Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for those people who have their natal Pluto in the 5th house. And I actually have this in my chart, and I confess that I still don't have a complete grasp of how this is playing out in my life as a whole. There are so many planets and houses that I totally get. This one is a little bit more difficult. And I think one thing that we can talk about is the fact that Pluto, which is one of the rulers of Scorpio, along with Mars and in that 8th house, can have that kind of, I don't want to say subtle because there's a lot of intensity there, but that kind of underneath quality, that below the surface quality. So it might not be overtly obvious. It just is so deeply embodied within the person that they have it, they possess it, but they just don't realize it. So I think it's better to talk about what the 5th house represents. And the 5th house is ruled by Leo in the universal chart, and it is going to be kind of like those themes that Leo represents, which is about creativity. It's a fire house because Leo is a fire sign, and therefore it has to do with creative self-expression. I think that's a big one, but love. And, when you think about the sign of Leo, it's a very warm-hearted sign. It's the house of children, and but it was really interesting because I was just looking up the 5th house because I was trying to think if there are other avenues that I could be exploring here. And one of the words that they mentioned, I don't think it was this site because I'm using advancedastrology.com as one of my sources, but I think it was some other site. And they used the word hedonism, which that kind of threw me for a loop because I know that the 5th house is the house of pleasure. And hedonism is pleasure taken to excess. But hedonism is not a synonym for pleasure. They're not, the exact same thing. So you can seek pleasure and not be a hedonist. The 5th house is fun and games, amusement, entertainment. And, it has that sense of positivity attached to it because of what it represents. Now, you think of Pluto, and I'm sure that those who are familiar with Vedic astrology would see that Pluto is considered a malefic planet, like Mars and Saturn and things like that, because there are some challenging qualities that are attached to it. But because they choose to separate a planet like Venus from a planet like Pluto, they're going to create this black and white dichotomy that is, to me, too extreme and too simplistic. So if we look at Pluto as something that really challenges us, ultimately, because it is considered so transformative, and transformation requires a lot from us in order to happen. It just doesn't magically occur on its own. Certainly, wherever Pluto is in your chart, this can be an area that feels very intense, and in some cases heavy if there are a lot of afflictions to Pluto. But it can, they say to look to your Pluto in your natal chart as the area of greatest transformation. So for people with Pluto in the 5th house, this could be with artistic endeavors. So in my particular case, I have a conjunction with the moon there. So that enhances that creativity, that emotional output that is into creative self-expression. But even if you just have Pluto here, you may be very connected to art in some way, whether it's your own or other people's. But I will say that the fifth house is supposed to be your personal creative self-expression. So it would actually be specifically with that. But because it does involve things you do in your spare time, if that's an interest or a passion of yours, art, then that could involve you being passionate towards other people's art. And so a person who has this placement may be very intense about being an artist. You know, it's funny, I have no idea what Picasso's astrology is. I think he might have been, though, a Scorpio. I thought he was a Taurus. He might have been a Scorpio, but he had like the vibe when I was watching the documentary of being like totally living and breathing art. You know, I think he was very prolific. I saw an exhibit at the Art Institute of Chicago, and there were just rooms and rooms of his different paintings and drawings. I mean, the guy was just constantly creating. And so somebody like that, regardless of what his actual astrological placement was, is an example of somebody who is just like totally absorbed in it. By the way, I just looked up Picasso. He was a Taurus. I mean, a Scorpio. So there you go. October 25th, 1881. That's when he was born. But he used to draw bulls. So who knows? Maybe he has a moon in Taurus or something. He or Taurus rising. In any case, that makes sense. That even as a sun sign, you know, the sun rules the fifth house. So a sun in Scorpio certainly could embody somebody who is very obsessive about whatever they do. But this is Pluto, and so if you are artistic, you definitely should express yourself this way. Don't hold back. Don't say, well, this is my profession that is totally different from that, and I don't have time for hobbies. Make time, because you could be somebody that could heal others through whatever it is that you're doing artistically, and certainly move them emotionally, which I do believe is a healing force. This is also the house of children. So the fifth house can be your first child. And if this is the case, that was very interesting. I did not know some of this. They say the second child is your seventh house and the third child is your ninth house, something like that, which is fascinating to me. There's always more to learn about the houses for sure, and astrology as a whole. But what I would say is that this can mean that the child is hard to handle because they may be very willful. There's a willful quality in Pluto. It is about your drive and your will. And so your child may, represent this. And I'm sure part of this is because it's ruling Scorpio, and Scorpio is a fixed sign. And so, fixed signs like Scorpio and Leo and Aquarius and what's the other one that I'm in? Taurus, are always accused of being stubborn. And that's because of that fixed nature, that willfulness. And so you might have a child like that. And so there might be power struggles. Pluto's about power issues. And you might have to, and one thing I'd say too is that you may have some of those yourself, and you have to look at how you're handling that child, because that could exacerbate the problem. A lot of times people who have issues with control find that they have a child who seems like they're mini me, And it's like back and forth with that person. And if the parent is not conscious enough, they can, put all of the blame on the child instead of looking at how they are interacting with that child. And in general, this can make you protective towards your children. So you'd be like a mama bear, papa bear, really like ready to step in. And, I think that can be a good quality, but again, there could be this excess of emotion. Whenever you have Pluto or Scorpio, there can always be that excess that is like over the top and not with the intensity, the ferocity that is not actually a good thing. So you have to temper that and, make sure that you're being within bounds. If you're being protective, that's one thing, but overprotective can actually discourage your child from being independent. And this is true for your love relationships. Now, you may be that kind of jealous, intense lover who demands total attention from your partner. And actually, one of the things that they were talking about is an egotistical nature, like a very strong ego. And that can lead to issues that create that person, kind of pushing back or, being a little bit uncomfortable with that kind of intensity, that kind of emotional demands that are being placed on them. They mentioned the word being childish about it. And again, going back to Leo in the 5th house, there is a quality with undeveloped Leos that can be kind of like childish. Again, we're talking about the house of the child. And so being childlike is different, being very spontaneous and playful. But being childish can be needing to be the center of attention, needing to always be looked, admired. And when that doesn't happen, being envious of other people, I guess you could say competitive, but more like just envying their qualities and wanting to have the kind of, accolades that they have or what have you, that kind of thing. And so I don't know if that's me. Because I have the moon here, that kind of muddies the water a little bit. So yeah, I can kind of cop to that a little bit, I guess. But the thing that confuses me is that because I have the moon here, it's a little bit different. If you just have Pluto here, I don't see how that would affect you emotionally in the same way. I think where they're going at is because the sun rules this house, that it's almost like saying, it's like having the sun in Scorpio or having something along those, or having, something like that, where you have this, intense nature in general, but the egotistical part, I don't know. So you'll just have to see if these things resonate with you. Now, the 5th house is also house of speculation, which means gambling and things like that. Now, in my personal case, I have an afflicted Pluto. I think, for what it's worth, I think I have some squares and oppositions. And so I have found I have not been successful the few times I've gambled in my life. And it just irritates me to lose money, so I just don't do it. So you have to be careful that you could have a gambling addiction. And actually, this was one of the houses that I remember being associated with addiction, probably because of that addiction to pleasure, that hedonism. So I guess you can become addicted to gambling. You can become addicted to sex because this is the house of sex. And the person, they say, can have a very powerful sex drive. If Pluto is in the 5th house, you're going to have to decide that for yourself. And they even mention kinky part of that. And I think that's because of Pluto, because there's that kind of, the seedy underbelly type of quality with Pluto. So that might translate into the type of thing that is happening. And for people that are getting involved in love relationships, or, they have a love relationship, the fear of being betrayed in love is part of what they mention here. And I don't resonate with that. To be honest with you, some of these things I just don't resonate with. I think that you have to take it for what it's worth. Some of these things you might, and some you might not. I overall find that the interpretations of each house, for me, my planets in each house work very well, but some of them don't. Some of them I just don't really think are on point the way that I like them to be. So it is what it is. But for some of you, this may be the case, especially if you are a sun in Scorpio or you have the moon in Scorpio. Scorpio is a big sign for trust issues and fear of betrayal, fear of abandonment. And the weird thing about that is that a sign like Scorpio can be not as easy to deal with. So it's like sometimes they may even, do things that pretty much guarantee that the person is going to abandon them. So that's one of those patterns that if you notice that in your life, that you have to really nip in the bud, because that fear of being betrayed, if it's taken to the extreme, it can lead to somebody that has an overly suspicious nature. It's very controlling, possessive over their partner, and that can make that person run for the hills. Taurus, a prominent Taurus, Venus in Taurus, Sun, Moon, that can do the same thing, Mars. So anyway, what else? Was there anything else here? I think I said just about everything that I wanted to say. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like me to look at your chart, I have all kinds of readings. The link is below. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye.